Okay, folks, a very, very warm welcome to you all. Again, I'm Professor Amelia Hadfield, and I'm joining you from Guildford in Surrey. And it's my real pleasure to welcome you all to this event representing Hong Kong through global advocacy. This is one of a number of events taking place under the support of the ESRC within their Festival of Social Science. This is an incredibly important event, and I know we've got lots and lots of attendees, and I think the number of attendees just tells us so much about the reason and the rationale behind the event, as well as the nature of the speakers. Malte, who's really the star of the show, has given me an incredibly strict running order, for which I do thank him. I'm to welcome you, I'm to act as chair, I'm to introduce the panelists, and then as we go sort of back and forth between us and Ray and Ben and Natalie, you'll get a sense of where we're going for this. So very, very briefly, the point of today is to launch the official trailer of Dr. Malte Kaeding's feature-length documentary film, Black Bohemia. And again, this has been put together and funded by the ESRC IAA grant. Now, I've had the privilege of seeing almost all of this, and it's a film that is really incredible. It crystallizes, I think, 10 years solidly of Malte's work on social activism, on identity politics, and democratization in Hong Kong. And the most recent focus of that, of course, is the Hong Kong localist movement. So after the trailer release, Malte is going to join a panel, and a very warm welcome to them, including Ray Wong, who is one of the protesters whose story is featured in the documentary, Ben Rogers, CEO of Hong Kong Watch, and Baroness Natalie Bennett, Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle, who, as you all know, is the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Hong Kong. So again, the aim of the panel is to introduce you to the work that Malte's been doing, and also about unpacking, I think, the very real complexity of Hong Kong's situation to the public. You, I think, probably all know Malte Kaeding. He's a senior lecturer now in international politics at the University of Surrey. And he researches emotions in international relations, and he's the founder and co-convener of the Hong Kong Studies Association as well. He looks at identity questions with a focus on the Chinese-speaking region. And again, he's the director, writer, producer for Black Bohemia, which is marvelous. In a couple of minutes, we'll be able to welcome on Natalie Bennett, Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle. She's a Green Party life peer, and she's the former leader of the Green Party in England and Wales from 2012 to 2016 as well. I'm delighted to be able to welcome Ray. Ray Wong, of course, is a Hong Kong activist, and he founded the political party Hong Kong Indigenous, and their slogan is Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Time. And that's become one of the main slogans in the 2019 anti-extradition law movement as well. So Ray, a very, very warm welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And Ben, Benedict Rogers, a human rights activist and writer. Warm welcome to you too, Ben. Ben is the co-founder and chief executive of Hong Kong Watch, a member of the advisory group also of IPAC, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, and senior analyst for East Asia at the International Human Rights Organization, CSW. That is the lineup at this point. So I think all it remains for me to do is just to remind you of what's happened in the news just today. Hong Kong opposition lawmakers all quitting after 4 members have been ousted. So there's very real outrage after Beijing imposes a new law allowing disqualification of quote unquote unpatriotic legislators. I was amazed to hear this morning, because I think the very real salience of what we're going to be talking about today is just further heightened as a result. So I'm going to finish with that and pass to Malte to talk and introduce with regards to the screening of the Black Bohemia trailer. Malte, thank you.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and thank you very much for attending this event. Thank you so much for Ray, Ben, and Baroness Bennett to attend, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion. So what we will do at the beginning, I just want to share my screen and then show you the trailer, and then we start our discussion. So bear with me just for a second.
Hi 梁生，你喺入邊嘅生活過得點啊？
中國殖民香港， 當政府拒絕回應人民，香港斷斷續續嘅反送中抗爭，逐漸轉化為一場抵抗赤化嘅時代革命。
The young in particular are feeling that this is not right. We need to fight for ourselves.
我叫黃台仰，我係本土民主前線嘅發言人。
我係梁天琦啦，係香港人。大家都一樣，細心入邊有一個烏托邦，即係一個獨立自主自由嘅香港。
The government was doing their utmost to expose the activists to maximum penalty.
就同我講話，我哋而家告你暴動罪。
最近都喺度諗，即係究竟自己離開香港係一個啱嘅決定啦，定係錯嘅決定啦？
我講咩都好啦，我喺好多人眼中我都係一個罪人，我都係一個逃犯，我都係一個走犯。即係希望下一代睇翻而家呢一段香港嘅歷史嘅時候，會知道其實即係我哋係真係盡咗自己最大嘅努力。咁希望佢哋係有所啟發啦。
Okay, so this was the trailer for the film, and I hope that you like it. So I want to just say a few words about the film. We started filming in September 2017, so that's 3 years and 3 months ago. And this week we just entered post-production, so we or finished post-production. So hopefully this will be then out soon. I will say a few words about this at the end. First, I need to thank a few people, of course. First of all, I need to thank Ray for his patience, also his trust in me as a rookie filmmaker, and surviving 7 hours of interviews without any food. Yeah, so that was really kind of him. Of course, I had a very great team in Hong Kong and the UK, Spain, and Taiwan working all together. We screened this, as Amelia said already, here in Surrey. We screened this in Hong Kong, and the feedback we got was really, really good. So I want to thank also everybody who gave me feedback here, from students, staff, but also the audience in Hong Kong. And of course, I have to thank the uni for funding all this. So that's really very important to me, that they had this trust in me to do this. So I would just want to say a few words about why did I make this film. So first of all, I felt at the time when I did my research on localism, so I'm doing this, as Amelia said, for almost 10 years now, so 2011, 2012, there was an issue with representation. So I did a lot of interviews. I did over 80 with all the available localist leaders, but the literature and the media I felt quite a little bit biased, building on just a few individuals and then generalizing this. And there was also a little bit of a cynical view on localist among the academia in Hong Kong, seeing them as creating chaos intentionally just to benefit their own personal careers. And I've also felt there was the discrepancy between what they told me in their interviews, the localist leaders, the media representation, and also what they wrote themselves, especially on social media, and trying to unpack all of these. So one goal of the film is to offer a comprehensive and a critical assessment of localism. The second aim of the film is to tackle the question of emotion. So through my research, I realized that emotions are very important as an explanatory factor in the movement. So it's not that I want to label the movement as emotional, but just a way of explaining its rise. And I believe that this a multi-dimensional approach towards explaining these issues can go beyond the textual expression of emotion. So that's why I made the film. Yeah, and the final reason is that I always wanted to make a film. Yeah, and I thought, okay, well, this is maybe a good midpoint between my research, my love for Hong Kong, and also my dream of making a film. So, and I think I'm very happy that after 3 years has completed, and I smuggled in a small reference to John Woo in the title. Of course, if you follow Hong Kong cinema, so that's my connection to the Hong Kong cinema. So I want to conclude by just saying a few words about what this film, what makes it different from other films about Hong Kong activism. We have some really great films like Lost in Fumes with Edward Leung. We have 2 films about Joshua Wong, really good. Have excellent films about the umbrella movement, and now already about the extradition movement. So I recommend that you look at all of these and watch these, as all of them together really can provide you with an excellent overview of what's really going on in Hong Kong, and really a timeline. This film tries to be a little bit different, with a strong focus on analysis and explanation. So the film gives the localist a stage to explain all their decisions so far. And it's really grounded in my long-term analysis of the subject. And this is reflected, of course, in the choice of the interview partners. And this explanation analysis then is matched with these more emotional story of the 2 protagonists. Yeah, Ray, one of them, and the story is representative, I think, of activist choices in Hong Kong, but also the fate of Hong Kong more broadly. When you see what their fate is, of Edward and of Ray. And finally, the film production has really tried to be as interactive as possible. So we had an amazing local crew in Hong Kong, and regularly met and discussed, and a lot of their ideas were really coming into the film, as I mentioned already, international and domestic audience. So we took a survey here among classmates, students, and colleagues, and really reflected on this, added new things, re-edited things after our first screenings, but also protagonists. So I bugged Ray, I don't know how many times we met, always very patient, and then always including new ideas, and from Ray himself. So I think that makes this film really a product, hopefully, that is representative of the movement and their ideas. Yeah, that's basically it from me so far. For screenings and next steps, you can follow us on Facebook, of course. Yeah, and we also create a new website with more interactive elements, where I have more information on the film and the research. So that's all from me. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much for the introduction and the context as well, the rationale behind the very important project that you've been a part of. I'm going to turn over to Ray now, and Ray, of course, absolutely central to this project to talk a bit about the participation in the film itself, and the role of advocacy from exile. So Ray, if you could jump on, and Malte has asked you to speak for between 8 to 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this event. I think that after 4 years of participating in the productions of this film, actually it's in the course of doing interview with Malte. As Malte said, we had a very intense 7-hour interview back to 2016. But during the interview, actually, I also had an opportunity to reflect on my own decision and reflect on my own ideology and motive, why I got involved and become activist. So the film started interviewing me in September 2017. At that time, actually, I was struggling with deciding whether I should leave Hong Kong or not, because I was charged due to the fishbowl revolutions with participating in a riot, inciting a riot, and also inciting an illegal assembly. These charges could be enough for me to spend up to 10 years in the prison. And of course, I had a lot of discussion with my colleagues, including Edward Leung, whether we should all stay in Hong Kong or some should leave Hong Kong and some should stay in Hong Kong to face the trial. And at the very beginning, my thought was that as Edward was more well-known internationally, and he is a really great storyteller, my thought was that Edward should leave Hong Kong to tell our story all over the world, to raise the awareness, and I should stay in Hong Kong to face the trial, and also during the trial to give our arguments and to explain ourselves. Because back to that time, as Malte said, localists were not well understood even by Hong Kong people, and we hope to make use of every opportunity to tell our thoughts and our ideology. But back to 2017, about August, Edward has made up his mind that he will stay in Hong Kong to face the trial. So then I started thinking whether I should leave. But this is a really tough decision, because once I left Hong Kong, it means I may not be able to go back to Hong Kong in my whole life, and also I would be seen by a lot of Hong Kong people, also my supporter, as a betrayer, as a traitor, because I, in the eyes of them, I gave up my cause in Hong Kong. I abandoned my colleagues at Edward Leung. So it was really a tough period of time in my life. But after talking with various people, listening opinion from them, I finally made up my mind that, okay, our story should be told not only in Hong Kong but also internationally, and someone should do this job. So I fled to Germany, and I sought asylum there. And after about 7 and 8 months after arriving to Germany, I was granted refugee status by the German government. Since then, I started doing lobbying work in Germany. At that time, it was just 2018. Not many European politicians were aware of what was happening in Hong Kong. When I told my story to them, they were very shocked, because in their understanding of Hong Kong back to that time, Hong Kong was one of the freest cities in the world with democracy and rule of law. People there are rich and happy. So when they know there was a group of young people fighting for democracy, and because of this fight, they were charged with such severe charges, they were shocked, and they were very keen to help and to do more for Hong Kong people. And actually, this is a new challenge for me, because first of all, in Hong Kong, my role as an activist is leader of a political party. I made decisions for the party, and I also represent the party to speak of our ideologies. But in Germany, outside Hong Kong, the skills required to do this advocacy work and also the language completely different, and it took me some time to adjust myself and to understand the mindset and a system in Germany and behind German politicians. So after my starting doing lobbying in Germany, I have a strong feeling that to help Hong Kong abroad is not only to lobby a few politicians or for officials in the government, but actually it's everyone in the Western countries, because here the democratic system is very mature. Everyone has their vote, has their rights to change the policy of the government, and the more lobbying, the more politicians I met, the more I believe that they are representing the people on the ground. So if I want to change the mind of politicians, I should first change the mind of the people. So I go back to the first point. So I really think Malte's work could help us for our cause, and also to give another perspective for Westerner to understand what behind the whole anti-extradition law movement. Because I, at the very beginning of the movement, I was oftentimes asked by politicians and also by German people, how Hong Kong people came up with such motives like no splits, no leader, and be water. But if you have watched the Malte's film, you would learn that actually the leaderless motive and the no splits motive are the result of the activisms in the past few years, and Hong Kong people have learned from the lessons in the past few years. So we came up with this new idea to advise our movement. Yeah, I guess the time more or less. Yeah. So I am looking forward to discussing and to answering the questions from you in the discussion session. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for that. It was a super introduction. I know that the questions are going to come flooding in very, very soon. And can I encourage everybody just to pop their questions in the chat, and Ray can see them, as can the others, and we can start answering those. I'd like now to move over to Ben Rogers to talk about advocacy in general and evidence-based advocacy in and on Hong Kong particularly. So Ben, again, Malte's request to keep it to 8 minutes so that we've got lots of time for question and answers afterwards. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much. It's a really great privilege to be part of this. And I want to start by congratulating Malte on this amazing effort. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the full film. And I think films like this are incredibly important for advocacy, because in order for people like me to talk to people like our next speaker, Baroness Bennett, and other members of Parliament, we need to have the first-hand stories from the ground to make the case about what's happening. And there are various ways we can gather those stories, but I think documentary films are one of them, and they're a very powerful way of informing people and also of mobilizing the public. because I think, again, people like me can only do a certain amount. What we absolutely need is members of the public to be engaging their elected members of the House of Commons as constituents on these issues to mobilize them. And again, films like this can really mobilize the public to do that. So I think it's really important, and I really congratulate Malte. Just to perhaps give you some very brief background to my connection with Hong Kong and Hong Kong advocacy, and then share some thoughts on principles for advocacy. I went out to Hong Kong in 1997, just after the handover, September 97, as a young, fresh graduate to begin my working career as a journalist. And I lived in Hong Kong for the first 5 years as a journalist until 2002. But actually, it was in Hong Kong that my advocacy work really was born as well, because in my spare time, besides being a journalist, I got involved in human rights advocacy, not for Hong Kong at that time, but for other parts of the region. So I was very involved in the struggle for freedom in East Timor, in Burma. I then became involved in other issues in Indonesia, in North Korea, and in mainland China. And I remember, for example, when I lived in Hong Kong, just as Ray was describing the feeling that Hong Kong was this, and it was this open and free city. For me, it was a hub for activism for the rest of the region. I actually led protests for East Timor in Hong Kong. And today, I speak in protests for Hong Kong, but I never imagined that day would come. I left Hong Kong in 2002, and to be honest, I didn't keep really in touch with Hong Kong politics until the umbrella movement in 2014, essentially because during those years, at least on the surface, things by and large were okay. One country, two systems was generally working well. Basic freedoms were generally protected. And I had all these other issues in the rest of the region that I was focused on. But when the umbrella movement happened, I realized something very fundamental had changed in Hong Kong, and I started to engage initially in a personal, individual capacity in my spare time, trying to speak to members of parliament, trying to write op-eds and so on. And then eventually in 2017, I came together with a number of others because I realized that the one thing I would say about advocacy is you can't do it on your own, or you can't do it effectively and sustainably on your own. And I realized that we needed an organization to actually take this forward. And so co-founded Hong Kong Watch. And I'm now pretty much full-time with Hong Kong Watch. The advocacy on Hong Kong grew over the years. From the time I got involved in 2014. I started to host various activists who came to London. Nathan Law, the youngest elected member of the legislature, who then ended up being disqualified, imprisoned, and is now in exile. Joshua Wong. I remember being very struck hosting Anson Chan, the former chief secretary of the Hong Kong government, and taking her to see, well, firstly discovering that she didn't have meetings. I'd assumed that she had a whole range of meetings set up, being at the level that she was, but she arrived in London, she had no program, and I just happened to meet her and said, would you like some meetings? Ended up being able to take her to see various key people in Parliament and in the Foreign Office. And the level of awareness at that time about what was happening in Hong Kong was really shocking. And that was another reason for starting Hong Kong Watch, because I realized that we needed to raise awareness. We needed to educate people about what was happening in Hong Kong. Hong Kong Watch got a little bit of a boost in terms of its profile, not by my intention, but because in October 2017, just before launching the organization, I decided to try to visit Hong Kong again, because I felt it was really important to talk to people on the ground. And that's another key principle for advocacy, having contact with people on the ground to find out what their situation is, to find out what their goals and desires are. But unfortunately, Beijing decided that I wasn't welcome, and I was rather publicly denied entry to Hong Kong, which drew quite a lot of media and political attention. And although I certainly didn't seek that attention for myself, I welcomed it in the circumstances, because I thought, well, I would have rather have got into Hong Kong, but if I'm going to be denied entry, then let's use that to shine a spotlight on Hong Kong and draw attention to the issues there. And so that's what I did. Let me just share a few very quick final thoughts more broadly. I think I came up with a couple of acronyms for the principles of advocacy, and I think these apply to different forms of advocacy. There's political advocacy with parliamentarians and governments, but there's also media advocacy and engaging the media to cover these issues. But the principles, I think, apply to both. The first acronym, it spells the word ACT, because advocacy should always lead to action. And the acronym for ACT is the first principle of accuracy. I think it's vital that information is absolutely accurate and authentic. Secondly, credibility. If you lose your credibility through exaggeration or through false information, then advocacy is undermined. But thirdly, timeliness, being able to react quickly to situations. We couldn't have, I don't think we timed this event deliberately with any foreknowledge of what was going to happen today, but it is incredibly timely. But one of the things I've learned in advocacy is you wake up each morning and you don't quite know what's going to happen that day. You might have your plan for the day, but it can be disrupted by events. And I woke up this morning with other things to do and realized that I had to put those aside. And we've responded to what's happened in Hong Kong very swiftly. We've organized a letter from senior parliamentarians to the Foreign Secretary urging him to respond to the situation. We've issued a statement with comments from the last governor, Chris Patten, and the former Foreign Secretary, Malcolm Rifkind. And I'll just share quickly what they said in our statement. Chris Patten says that what's happened today is yet another example of the Chinese Communist Party trampling on what is left of democracy. Once again, Xi Jinping's regime has demonstrated its total hostility to democratic accountability and those who wish to stand up for it. And Malcolm Rifkind says Xi Jinping has signed the death warrant for one country, two systems, but we salute the courage of the pro-democracy camp. They are the giants, and the Chinese government are little more than bullies. So ACT, accuracy, credibility, and timeliness. But the second acronym of principles spells CCP, not Chinese Communist Party, but collaboration or coalition. I think it's really important that just as no one individual can advocate effectively or sustainably by themselves, similarly, no one organization really can. So we in Hong Kong Watch try to collaborate as widely as possible with different organizations and individuals. Secondly, that it must be cross-party. Baroness Bennett is a Green parliamentarian, but there are parliamentarians from the Liberal Democrats, Labour, Conservatives, all the major parties. And every time we do anything in Parliament, we always try to make sure that we have cross-party support for it. And then the P, I think, is persistence. This is a long haul, and clearly in the case of Hong Kong, it's definitely going to be a long haul, but we need to persist and not give up. There are other things I could say, but I think for the sake of time, I'll stop there and just say that I think advocacy is incredibly important, particularly at this time for Hong Kong, where people in Hong Kong face far greater danger advocating for themselves in Hong Kong, and therefore all the more reason why those of us who are outside Hong Kong and who have a voice that we can use should use that effectively in different ways, whether that's through film, through parliamentary advocacy, through the media, or through protest or other ways. So thank you very much.
Ben, thank you. That was absolutely excellent. I'm really delighted now to introduce Baroness Bennett. Natalie's online, which is great. So Natalie, do jump in. Just a quick reminder to everybody not to panic. I just now need to duck out and do the school run. So I'm going to hand over to Malte after the Baroness is finished. And also to my lovely colleague, Nikos, who is very kindly going to be moderating the Q&A. But I will be back, just like Hong Kong. Okay.
Thank you very much, Amelia. And, I've just leapt in from a debate on the Medicines and Medical Devices Bill in the House of Lords. So the magic of Zoom means that sometimes we can fit more things in, which is not always a good thing, but often it is. So, have a good school run. I'm delighted to join you all at the Department of Politics at Surrey today and to be on such a distinguished panel and to see from Malte a taster of the brilliant video that's been put together. And I think in these days of social media and high quality communications, work like that is so very important in getting messages out. Amelia referred to where we are today, and I just think it's worth reflecting for a second on the emotional side of the moment. We can be very disappointed, very sad about the repression from Beijing that's reflected in the events of yesterday and today, about the way in which so many people in Hong Kong must be so fearful, so worried, as we well know. But we can also be proud and uplifted, and it's always important we focus on the hope. When we saw all the legislators, the pro-democracy legislators getting together and saying, we're going to stick together. And I very much echo what Ben just said in terms of that importance of working collectively, because on your own, it's a very, very large challenge. Now, I was asked to speak about a couple of things, particularly. One is the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Hong Kong, of which I'm the co-chair in the Westminster Parliament. Now, all-party parliamentary groups, as the name suggests, come from all different cross-party actions. And just to explain what we do, we exist to promote democracy and the rule of law and defend human rights in Hong Kong, to share information about Hong Kong, and to nurture relations between the people of Hong Kong and the people of the UK. Now, as an example of the kind of things that we did, we have put together a report. We all saw a great deal of information about how during last year's protests, first aiders and medical professionals were being mistreated, not properly treated by the police. But the nature of today is all of those things exist on social media. They're in a moment. They come from all kinds of different sources. What we did was we collected evidence. And I should stress that all-party parliamentary groups don't have any formal legal position, but we have the chance to ask people to come together to collect that evidence, to treat that in a formal, serious way. And that then provides a body of evidence that people are able to use to point to. What we can also do, of course, is advocate. And very often we find ourselves regularly writing to the government, calling for stronger action, with, of course, the crucial position of the UK as the signatory to the joint declaration, that I often find myself, I'm fairly active on social media, and I find myself occasionally being bombarded on this issue. But, we have, as the UK, a formal legal position, as well as the moral responsibility. I mean, one of my areas of interest in this was I was actually in Bangkok when the Hong Kong handover happened. I was working for the Bangkok Post newspaper, and I in fact managed that newspaper's coverage of the Hong Kong handover. And I'm stressing that word handover because I can remember even then being really uncomfortable with the idea of handing over millions of people in this kind of way, without them having had a real and proper say. And of course, what we're seeing now is the outcome of that. To mention the other group in which I'm somewhat more proliferally involved, but I do what I can, there's also the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, known as IPAC for short. And that is parliamentarians from all around the world operating in much the same ways as the All-Party Parliamentary Group does. And so we're working collectively across party within the UK and around the world. But of course, one of the main ways we actually operate is directly in Parliament ourselves. And so just to give a very concrete example of this, in a sign that the House of Lords can sometimes be more nimble and and active than you might expect for a body with an average age of 70. Tomorrow, Baroness Northover, the Lib Dem, has put down a private notice question about the events today in Hong Kong, and I hope to be taking part in that with people from all other parties, and again very much pushing the government for the strongest possible action. The kind of things we're of course pushing for are what are known shorthand, and I guess most people on this call will know about what are known as Magnitsky-style sanctions, calling for united international action with the UK in its lead, with the Five Eyes group, other governments acting together. And we also very much need to see monitoring permanent and establishment at the UN of an oversight to keep an eye on what's happening in Hong Kong, and perhaps also more broadly with human rights issues generally in China. The All-Party Parliamentary Group actually last week held an event with Sophie Richardson from Human Rights Watch, their China lead, looking also and tying together events also in Tibet and Xinjiang. And it's crucial that we do look at these things collectively, which kind of brings me to the final points I'd like to make about the nature of advocacy, and something that's a bit of one of my pet subjects, is that when I was asked to be co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, I had literally been in Parliament a week. And my first reaction was to say, shouldn't you actually ask someone who knows where to find the loos before you ask me to do that? But it was put to me that to be cross-party, to be taking as many parties as possible, was something that was very important. But also that what I bring in and what I perhaps add is a different political perspective, because the practical reality is that within the British context, lots of the people who work on Hong Kong issues and work on other issues, certainly in a parliamentary context, are people who also have other beefs with the Beijing regime, people who come from certain political positions, often right-wing political positions. And one of my pet things is to say that we actually need to, lots of people will pay lip service to this, but we need to actually believe and act on the understanding that human rights are universal and they should apply to everyone. Now, if you look at some of the human rights issues that I've worked on over the years, I've been doing a lot of work on the position of women and more generally the state of human rights in Saudi Arabia, the impacts of the war in Yemen and Saudi Arabia's actions in Yemen, often using British arms. I've worked on human rights in the Congo, where there's particularly, again, violence against women that's associated with Western mining companies. And what we have to do is use human rights as a universal issue that every country in the world needs to be held to these standards. Very often, traditionally, people have used human rights as a stick to beat the people with whom they had other beefs, other quarrels, and to quietly just turn their face the other way to people who they regarded as friends for reasons of commerce or reasons of international politics, and even to turn their face the other way when people who they saw were enemies of their enemies, so therefore sort of their friends. And if we're going to create the kind of world we need to create, we need to actually say that human rights need to be upheld by everyone around the world. People need to stick together. So if there's one piece of advice that I'll finish on, because I always believe that dialogue's better than monologue, and I look forward to hearing the questions and discussion. But one thing to finish on is the thoughts that it would be great if campaigners working on human rights in Hong Kong, if you reach out to people all around the world and really help to make this a joined up human rights movement. You know, having lived in Thailand, I'm watching closely what's happening there in Thailand, and we're seeing huge numbers of young people who are demographically very similar to lots of the people who've until recently been on the streets in Hong Kong, calling for real democracy there. There's so many different places around the world where if you join up these campaigns, they can be so much stronger. So let's focus on what's happening in Hong Kong, but let's also see this in a global context and work on a global context and say human rights should apply to every human being on this planet. And the more we can work together on that, the closer we can get to achieving that goal, which has, after all, been a goal of the world since after the Second World War, and it's about time we really started delivering on it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Baroness Bennett, and for these excellent remarks and very inspiring remarks as well, as you said, trying to instill more hope into the current situation. I think that's really, really important. Yeah, so we now have around an hour and 10 minutes for a discussion. So please put forward your questions and then the panel will answer them, and Nikos will help us to filter these questions. And yeah, that's it for me. So we can start with the first question. Also, we will stop the recording, so you don't have to be worried about any privacy issues. Only the speakers will be recorded. Thank you.